Let's go ahead and get this meeting started. And habitually lead in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
What's the meeting?
Everyone's
We have the minutes of the February 6, 2024, meeting in pages 1 to 3. Do we have any comments, corrections? Do we have a motion for approval?
To approve. Second.
Any other comments? If none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We have nothing on public comment, or nobody signed in. Is there anybody here who would like to make a public comment at this time? Seeing none, and moving forward. Let's do self-introductions. I think we have just about everybody here. I'll start with myself. I'm Kevin Breitsky, Porter County Surveyor, and I'm also a commissioner on this board.
Mitch Barlow, NERC staff.
Laura Baum, NERC staff.
Ryan Lissick, Direct from Indiana.
George Toffel, Union Township, Western County, and
Mark Goodell, Town of Chesterton.
Dean Button, City of Hammond.
Lisa Schrader, NDOT Laporte District.
Martin Belichick, Porter County Highway Engineer.
Max Graylander, about the City of Valparaiso.
That's for your Valpo Transit.
Kendrick Polite, NERC staff.
Jeff Hewitt, Sheriff Holman.
Jake Damaro, Public Permit in Cypher.
Julie Richler, NDOT Laporte District.
Steve King, Town of Maryville. Alex Wesker, Public Permit in Cypher.
Brian Snedeker, Public Permit in Cypher.
Scott Butler, NERC staff.
Stephen King, NERC staff.
Tom Medway, NERC staff.
Grace Benninger, NERC.
I think we have everybody. I appreciate you reciting your names for attendance. It really helps out our secretary. Next on the agenda is planning. 3.1, Northwest Indiana 2050 Plus Transit Presentation by Stephen Hughes. This is information, so we don't put it in action. Mr. Hughes.
All right, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. So many of you have heard a little bit of this before. I went into a little bit more detail than what we presented on the transit chapter of NWI 2050 Plus than what we presented to this body before, because we have a little bit more time. So the chapter starts out with a profile of our transit operators, and it describes all of the transit operators, so what their system looks like, what type of transportation they provide, whether that's fixed route, fixed guideway, or demand response. And then we look at the demographics and how those things play together to develop a transit demand index. So as you might imagine, places with higher population density, higher job density, you're going to have higher demand for transit. With lower densities, you'll have lower demand. But beyond that, we looked at poverty level, minority population, disabled populations, population over 65, and those without access to vehicles. So all of those get put together, and we come up with the transit demand index. As with most heat maps, red means high, green means low, and then we've overlaid that with the fixed route service as well as the demand response service that's available to the general public. This graphic is also blown up in the actual chapter, focusing in on some of the areas because as you can see, there are big portions of the county with fairly low demand. So kind of focusing in on those areas that do have higher demand was critical to represent, how we are doing in terms of preparing public transit for people. We also looked at service efficiencies. So that's where are we doing a good job? Where are there gaps or overlaps? How can we address those? And what's really accessible in the region? So this map represents the availability and accessibility of areas by transit. So taking all of that into consideration, the chapter then goes on to provide a couple of potential answers to how do we make this a better connected area. One is a grid system. This would mean transfers taking place at street intersections, at major points, but generally following the major corridors through our communities. And that would provide 10 new proposed routes. So you can take a look at this, you can see that pretty much gets the north portions of Lake and Porter County connected together. And then the other proposal that comes out of 2050 Plus is a hub proposal, where instead of looking at, okay, how do we make this grid across, there will be more formalized transfer locations. Things would be timed a little bit more tightly, and points of interest are the main locations where transfers are going to take place, rather than, here's this intersection that gets you to the next place. You might be going to a hospital that gets you to the next bus that can get you into the next county, for example. This was the preferred system as the report came out, due to being more cost effective and a little bit more flexible and reaching more locations of interest. So this is sort of the mindset of how we want to move forward with developing an interconnected regional system here. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
But
I can see it. I can see it.
I get so many questions about how do we get to the airport? And this looks like it may be part of the solution.
Yeah. Probably the answer becomes you get to turn on the.
Hey, I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, you're fine. You want to find your way to one of the stations on the route for the NICD, and then take that in and hop on a bus. But yeah, right now, from if you have access to the South Shore, you have pretty decent access in the rest of the way, but a whole large portion of our population doesn't have easy access to that, and something like this would help with that. Great, absolutely.
Any other questions for Mr. Hughes? Of course, you can
Does
read
that
this.
have any, funding implications, or this is just, would be an ideal scenario?
This would be an ideal scenario. It does talk about phasing in the plan, and has now their 2023 dollars, which we know are different than 2024 dollars, because of the kind of cost of buses and everything else. But we do have some of that forecast out. A phasing that basically, as you might imagine, it starts north and works its way south to pick up the farther away places that, starting where there's the greater demand. But that is in there and detailed out in the plan.
It's a good first step, in my opinion, and we need to have a good plan in order to get the financing through FTA and the other organizations that we can complete our case through. So
Right.
this is available for each of your entities.
Yeah, and it's going to take the municipalities working together and the counties working together, and it may take some public-private partnership to really get to that. But we are already kind of starting to implement some of what's in this chapter with our nonprofit transportation feasibility study, where we're working with nonprofit groups that provide or would like to provide transportation for their client base and seeing if there's ways that they can kind of share some of that. So it's transportation, it's not exactly transit, but that is something that we've already begun discussions on. You'll be hearing more about that hopefully in the next few months.
So what's the timeline for completion of that study?
I believe we intend to have everything done on that by June. That's when the contract is signed through. And then it'll be after that we'll be bringing that to demonstrate what the output was. Yeah.
Very timely that you came, David. Let the record reflect that West and David Wright are not here. We just talked about transit. No other questions? We'll move on to Resolution 2405, Unified Planning Work Program.
Thank you. I presented a very almost identical presentation last year about this time because this is an annual task that we undertake, which is the preparation of our Unified Planning Work Program. This is a core planning document. It's required by the U.S. Department of Transportation. It is our approved work plan. It includes a program of planning tasks over the next fiscal year. And in this case, this is a 2-year UPWP, so it includes fiscal year 2025 and fiscal year 2026. So it begins July 1st of 2025 and concludes it begins July 1st of 2024 this year and concludes June 30, 2026. And this document, as I said, it's essentially our work plan. It is intended to document and forecast all the planning activities that we'll be conducting over the next 2 years. It has to be responsive to really two sets of policies. One is our local and regional policies that we set through our comprehensive regional plan and through other region-wide plans, such as, you saw one in the transit section of that most recent NWI 2050 Plus document. And it also addresses the priorities of the federal funding agencies. So this is funded, all of our activities here, the vast majority of our activities are funded by federal metropolitan planning dollars. And so because they are federal dollars, the federal agencies get to set some priorities on how we spend them. The required elements of the plan, as I mentioned, we have what are called planning emphasis areas. These are the priorities of the federal agencies. The most recent PEAs are based on the 2021 Transportation Authorization, which is alternatively called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. You'll hear it referred to as IIJA or BILL. So these planning emphasis areas, which are listed here, a little difficult to read, they're kind of small. I could go over them if you'd like, but all of the full UPWP is in your packet here, and you can look at that in more detail if you'd like. But all of our UPWP tasks are shown on the right-hand side of that table, the NERC planning element, and then on the left-hand side is the planning emphasis area. So we document in our report here how we're addressing those. I will mention that on an annual basis, the Indiana division of Federal Highway and the FTA publish their own planning emphasis areas. So for FY 2025, we've included the following: institutionalizing equity, accessibility, and safety, maximizing coordination, and urbanized area and metropolitan planning area boundaries. So a number of those are already addressed in our kind of core activities, but we do have some interesting tasks ahead of us, one of which is related to the designation of our metropolitan planning area boundaries. You may recall that we went through over the last year and developed an adjusted urbanized area boundary. Currently, our metropolitan planning area includes all of Lakeport and LaPorte counties. That's what it's been historically. So we will be reviewing that in the coming months to determine whether or not that needs any adjustment. I can't say that it will. It'll likely remain the same, but nevertheless, we will review it in accordance with the federal recommendations. So I want to talk a little bit about how the UPWP is formatted. Again, the entire document is here in your packet for detailed review, but you'll see that it's organized according to these categories: administration, data collection, and analysis. I'll give a brief description of each, I guess. Administration is just kind of the overall administration of the organization, right? It's funds, the staff work that goes into putting on these meetings, doing all of sort of the personnel-related activities, budgeting, those types of things. Data collection and analysis, that category funds our performance measurement work as well as GIS work. Short-range planning is the funding for primarily Charles' work with the Transportation Improvement Program and the development of the NOFA, and reviewing projects and that sort of thing. Long-range planning includes all of the work that we do related to any kind of corridor studies, related to any type of long range, such as the Northwest Indiana 2050 Plus. Multimodal planning addresses non-motorized as well as transit. And then 600 special planning activities. Those are projects that don't maybe necessarily fit directly under the day-to-day activities that we're conducting here as an agency. So we'll get to that at the end, but we do have a few of those. This UPWP, and then the 700 line item refers to the work of oversight of our transit subrecipients. The entire budget, as you can see, is broken down according to those categories. And then the primary funding sources that we use, as I mentioned, are these metropolitan planning dollars. So those line items highlighted there show the funds that are funding categories that are, or the activities that are funded through those PL funds. I'll just note that in FY25, we will receive $2.4 million. That would be 80% federal, 20% is our local match. FY26 is an estimate, so it's on there, but I'm not going to go into it in detail. And then the other funding sources that we use are what we call flex funds. Those are transferred from our TIP, and we use them for special projects. So we have flexed over congestion mitigation and air quality funds, CMAQ. We use that for all of our air quality public education. We use that to fund Drive Clean Indiana, South Shore Clean Cities. We are also flexing this year, again, HSIP, which is Highway Safety Improvement Program funding. That is, as the name states, for safety types of projects, and we can use a portion of that for planning. So we'll be flexing in $77,500 for road safety audits. So we did that last year. We're going to kick that off, actually, in this coming fiscal year, but we'll do basically 2 years worth of funding in FY25. And then finally, we've also flexed in some STBG, Surface Transportation Block Grant funds, which we have done historically, and we use that to fund the licensing fees for the RTIP software. So if you have either gone to the public portal and reviewed TIP projects, or you've actually entered projects in through that, that's funded through the STBG funds. In addition to...
Tom, if I could interrupt.
Yes.
This was all on page 16 of the handout you got today. There's a lot of areas that have nothing budgeted for, including data collection, short-range planning, long-range planning, multimodal planning, for complete streets, etc. Why are there's nothing budgeted on that? Page 16.
Page 16. So page 16 of the agenda packet.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so that's a good question. So in the document, there are a number of different tables. The table on page 16 is simply the contracted. So that's a table, and this is something that INDOT requires of us. They ask us to separate expenses for salaries and expenses for other outside costs, such as contracting costs or professional development, printing, and travel. So that table on page 16 of the agenda packet, page 8 of the UPWP, that shows exactly what I was just describing, which is, you can see under the 300 line item there, short-range planning RTIP software license. That shows the funding for that, but there are no contracted costs under.
So these are basically placeholders in case we have something.
Correct. Yeah. So this year we don't have any contracted costs under data collection and analysis, for example, or multimodal. If you turn, let's see. If you go back a few pages, you will see, for example, on page...
That would be 12 of the handout, page 4 of the...
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. On page 12, you'll see the full budget. So that would include all the contracted costs, plus all the staff salary costs, and overhead and all that. Okay.
So that's the difference between the two tables. One is actually the budget, the other one is actually the contract.
Right. That's something, as I said, that's something that INDOT requires of us to pull out what's being contracted. It helps them as they put together our purchase order and our contract with them.
That's fine. I was just looking for clarity because we've got a full table on one page and
No, it's a good
an empty
question.
page.
Yep. No, it's a very good question, and I appreciate it. I appreciate you looking at the table. So again, in addition to those activities, there's a special set aside that's required for complete streets planning, and that's a minimum of 2.5% of our PL funding has to be spent on what the U.S. Department of Transportation calls complete streets planning activities. And so our agency does quite a bit more than that. A higher percentage of our funding is devoted to work on complete streets. We do work related to transit-oriented development, to multimodal planning, to trails. All of those things are considered complete streets planning per the DOT definition, but we are required to pull that out, similar to how we have to pull out our contracted costs, and show that as kind of a separate line item. So you'll see in the document that we have approximately $60,000 that will be used under the 500 category, multimodal planning, and we'll be devoting that funding to just maintaining the active transportation priority corridor plan, development of an elevated trail feasibility study, and work on trail-oriented development. So then, as I mentioned, there are some additional special projects under that 600 category, and those are the Marquette Greenway. So we've included that. We have funding from a READY grant that will be used to match that federal fund to support the implementation of the federal RAISE grant, and that's for the completion of 2 segments of the Marquette Greenway, which is the New Buffalo Township section and the Michigan City section, and then engineering for the Portage and Gary sections. Second special project, which I mentioned, is road safety audits. So we have that funded for 2 years through the HSIP program. And then finally, we've set aside some funding in our program for LPA planning assistance / special plans. And this would be funding for local planning projects that would implement the goals and policies of NWI 2050 plus. That could include, as I've noted here, corridor plans, complete streets plans, other types of maybe more comprehensive plans that integrate transportation with land use and our other planning domains. So this is a program that's new. We haven't really fleshed it out altogether. We just set aside the funding, but the idea is that we will manage a process where we solicit for projects, select them, procure consultants, and then kind of manage the project in coordination with an LPA, a local government. And I do have a specific dollar amount listed in the UPWP, but it's kind of an estimate on this because the federal year 2026 PL funding formula is developed through a negotiated process between all the other MPOs in the state, and that process is underway. So we're not, as I mentioned, we have only an estimate of how much PL funding we'll receive in FY26. So because until that gets really nailed down, we won't exactly know how much funding we'll have available for these for this particular special project, because the budget is, at this point still inallocated. So that is the summary of the FY25-26 UPWP. We would be asking this board to recommend to the full commission adoption of resolution 24-05, which would approve this document.
That's page 7 of your packet.
I just have a question. I noticed that the funding for subrecipient oversight included 25, but there was nothing in 24. I don't know, is it new to include that, or was there just a pause at funding? All of these stuff in 24, so it's not carrying in 25?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no carryover shown. So, again, thank you for looking so closely at the tables. There are 3 years of funding shown on each one of these funding tables. That's FY24, which is funding that we project will not be spent during this current fiscal year, which we can then carry over and use in subsequent years. And then there's FY25, which begins in July 1st of this year, goes through June 30 of 2025, and then there's FY26, which begins July 1st in 2025 and concludes June 30, 2026. So yeah, if we don't spend all of our PL, we can carry over. Historically, we have been able to carry over quite a bit of funding. And in recent years, because there was a period where NRC there were a lot of vacancies on their staff, so we weren't able to spend a lot of that money. So we are carrying over quite a bit this year.
So the federal agencies have to do about that, or?
Only if we let it expire. So we've had a couple of years to spend, which we will. And now that we're fully staffed, that's not an issue at all.
Thank you, Beth. Any other questions? Comments?
Mr. Chairman, I move to make a favorable recommendation of this committee to the full commission to adopt resolution 24-05.
Second. I've got a first from Mr. Button, second from Mr. Vogel. Any other comments, questions, contributions? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anyone against? So moved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. We'll move on. We have no items for consideration for programming today, unless staff has come up with some. Topical committee reports from staff. Let's start with Mr. Berloga.
Thank you. I believe on May 2nd is our next, hopefully our next 3PC meeting. Our executive director, Ty Warner, had an announcement at the last commission meeting about readjusting some of the committee structures here. Internally, we are still working that through. We haven't really decided on how that's going to look because it's always easier in the concept than in the application. We want to make sure we do this once and hopefully it'll hold for many years to come. In the meantime, however, we're moving forward with our 3PC meeting. This is important because it's going to relate directly to the NOFA. That will be released later this year, in about September. We're going to go over the complete streets and multi-use trail section to kind of fine-tune those, review some of the outstanding questions and concerns that may have come up during the last solicitation, address them here, and prepare us for that solicitation period. So again, I believe, is that May 2nd?
Yes.
Thank you. I have to check with her. She keeps me in check. So yeah, May 2nd, 1:30 p.m. And hope you can join us.
Do we have any other topical committee reports today? Anybody?
Mentioned that the Surface Transportation Committee meeting, which we did not have in January, we will meet on April 23rd at 9 a.m. and we will also be reviewing some of the outstanding NOFA issues related to the roadway improvements, especially category on the NOFA solicitation as we head toward the fall and hope to make that a successful solicitation and look forward to presenting some forward measures there as well.
Thank you. Anyone else from the NERC staff with a topical committee report? If not, we'll go on to our planning partners, starting with Drive Clean.
All right, good morning, everyone. Just to give you some quick updates on grant funding, the EPA Clean Ports program is available. It's about a $3 billion total allotment of funding available. Applications are due the 28th. Projects are going to start later on this year, and they're going to be 4-year projects with estimated start dates in December. The final round of the VW settlement is currently open. Applications are due April 28th. This deals with replacing diesel engines and equipment for on-road and off-road. There's $4 million available, 25% off CNG and propane, 75% off electric. The next round of the charging and fueling infrastructure grant is going to be coming out here in the next week or so. It's going to be 80% funding towards clean fuel infrastructure related to EV charging stations, propane, and hydrogen, and compressed natural gas stations. The Indiana office has a program available called the EPIC grant funding, and applications are due June 30th, and this is $300,000 to $500,000 for programs that benefit energy efficiencies, energy security and reliability, alternative fueling and charging infrastructure, and also clean energy resources. Getting into project updates, Drive Clean Indiana did submit 4 projects for the National DARE program. We are currently receiving contracts and have been awarded funding tentatively, and more announcements to come to that. And then the EV charging and reliability accessibility accelerator was a program that we were awarded with NDOT and IDEM for $778,000 for replacing existing non-usable electric charging stations, and we expect that these will start coming up here shortly. And we do have some good events coming up. Northwest Indiana Partners for Clean Air applications, scholarship applications are due April 30th, and then we do have the Porter County birthday coming up on the 20th. And that concludes everything.
Yeah, thank you for announcing the Porter County Expo will be hosting Earth Day on the 20th, a week from this coming Saturday. So, also, there's a handout on the back table for the 2024, the final round of the VW mitigation grant. April 30th is the deadline for those.
I got a question. How many electric charging stations are not working? Percentage-wise in that area? Do you have any idea?
I can't give you a percentage, well, it's just total amounts.
Quite a few.
There's 55, and ultimately it comes down to legacy charging stations that were installed years ago. And it's not so much that the infrastructure is bad, it's more so going from 3G to 4G to 5G and all the technological upgrades that have taken place since the station has been underground since 2014.
So they don't work on
Absolutely. So yeah, it's about replacing or moving out using existing infrastructure and keeping those publicly accessible chargers going.
Good. Thank you.
Ryan, I'm sorry. You mentioned CFI when come out in the next week or so. PennDOT had a program to do a similar call for projects. Do you know if PennDOT's going to make a future call for projects, or was that a one-off?
No, I think that we're going to see a more holistic leadership from PennDOT from this time around. And we're working on developing a more cohesive and statewide program with PennDOT involved. And so they're going to be having some workshops coming up to have those calls and discuss what those opportunities look like for the different communities. And ultimately what it means is they're going to be the prime and they'll take in projects and sell them out to the interested parties.
Perfect.
Mr. Wright?
Yes. The EPIC funding, the charging stations, have those, do they have to be publicly accessible, or can they be free, or can they be a combination?
It has to be publicly accessible, but there is something that would be available for communities and public partners that serve the public as a public transit agency does, that I do believe is allowed.
I know there's a webinar, how to apply for register. It's not very.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Lister? Seeing none, do we have any other planning partners here today? I didn't hear anybody in attendance. Seeing none, we'll move on to other business. Do we have staff announcements?
I just have one announcement related to the road safety audit project. RMC had published an RFP for road safety audits. That closed last week. We received 4 responses, and we'll be reviewing those over the next month, making a selection. In the meantime, we will be publishing essentially a request for projects from local governments. So we're putting that together, and what we'll be doing is reaching out to all the local governments, asking for submittal of any high crash intersections that you'd like to be considered for a road safety audit. RMC staff will then review that list, rank them, and develop a priority list, which will then provide to the consultant for that project. So expect to see something probably through email in the coming weeks, asking for that information. In the meantime, if you could just give some thought to those intersections in your community that really needs some safety improvements. The idea of this project is that by conducting the RSAs, we will then make these intersections eligible for HSIP funding in the future for actual construction. So we're trying to set up a pipeline for safety projects.
Thank you. Do we have any other staff announcements? If not, our upcoming meetings are NERC Finance and Personnel Committee, April 18th at 8 a.m. And the NERC Full Commission will meet April 8th at 9 a.m. to consider the resolution we recommended today. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, May 7th, in this room at 10 a.m. Thank you all for attending. Is there anything else good for the class, Mr. Button?
At a recent full commission meeting, I believe Ty had mentioned escalation in the fees that LPAs pay to cover the cost of NERC. Did that ever get approved?
Yes.
And have the LPAs been notified of the increase?
Yes.
Okay.
But the councils had to be approached as a fiscal body. And then
The county councils.
So,
The counties.
County
county
councils.
and the legislation passed.
Brilliant, thank you.
So it's going to be spread out over 5 years, a general increase, of course enabling NERC to fund more projects in the long run.
Yeah, this was, it's been 20 years or so since
30.
30? Okay, so I understand. It's been a long time since an increase has been allowed, and it's well deserved.
Yep. It's unfortunate that they didn't approach it when they did the new legislation for the recreation board. I think it was attempted, but the focus was more really an elected officer-driven commission as opposed to a volunteer commission. But at the same time, that was one of the components that we didn't get into the statute. So we kind of frozen for years. So fortunately, they increased it because, of course, all of you dealing with engineering infrastructure, the escalation of cost is just constant with inflation, with all the other parts of doing business, and that wasn't happening on that end. But I congratulate staff on being very creative with all of our topical committees in figuring out how we finance and apportion people to accomplish what they did. So it's extraordinary that all the different committees could do what they did.
Thank you.
Any other thing good for the class? If not, we're adjourned.